The immigration crisis continues to build in this country, not just on our southern border, but let's face it, in most communities around the country. We're all border towns now, right? And so that's why it's very confusing to learn that Republican senators are joining their colleagues across the aisle to once again attempt some kind of bipartisan immigration reform bill, whatever that means. Joining us right now to explain what that means is Mark Krikorian. He, of course, the head of Center for Immigration Studies. I thought we killed this. Tom Tillis already sort of proposed this during the lame duck session, and under pressure he backed away, but here they come doing it again, Mark.
They never give up. And what's so unbelievable about this is that whatever deal that may superficially look like it's a good idea, amnesty for some targeted group of sympathetic illegal immigrants in exchange for some kind of border enforcement, doesn't make any sense because this administration is supposed to be enforcing the border anyway. It doesn't need any new laws.
Exactly.
I mean, there are legal changes we need, but if they're not doing their job now, why would you think they would use these new laws to enforce the border tomorrow after a bill like this passed?
We cannot spend too much time on this point, so I just want to repeat it so everybody understands. Because when you negotiate something, you give up something and the other side gives up something, right? So what the Republicans theoretically would be giving up in this deal is amnesty. Amnesty for DACA or other illegal immigrants who are in this country illegally for whatever reason. And they won't get prosecuted, they won't get deported, and they'll even have a roadmap to citizenship. That's what's being suggested. But Mark, the Democrats, what are they giving up? All they're doing, it appears, is agreeing to enforce laws that are already on the books. What is that?
It's nothing. It's a con. I mean, you kind of think that, the Republicans in Congress sometimes are like Charlie Brown, who keeps, being told the football will be there for him to kick, and the football keeps being pulled away.
Yeah.
It's like the enforcement has to be non-negotiable. We need enforcement up front. And then, frankly, I'm kind of a squish on some targeted amnesty under some circumstances, but we cannot be fooled again as we were under the big 1986 amnesty, where the amnesty happened and the enforcement didn't. That just can't be allowed to happen again.
Not to be too cynical, but let's face it, we are in Washington, D.C., so it's sort of the natural pastime to be cynical. It almost appears as though the Biden administration came into power, decided to stop enforcing the border, have record numbers, millions of people crossing this border illegally. It puts strain on these states, many of these states, conservative or Republican states, and they're now forcing the hand of Republicans. Basically, Republicans say, this is a nightmare, you got to do something. And they're basically saying, yeah, we'll do something if you give us what we want. It almost seems like a blackmail job.
Yeah, kind of. Except that, first of all, I don't know that they've thought it through that well, number one. Number two, they're not going to give us the enforcement anyway,
That's
even
true.
if this bill passes.
Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
So this is not. First of all, it's almost certainly not going to happen. But if it were to happen, all it would do would stimulate even more illegal immigration in the future.
Let's get to the not going to happen part of it, because that's the other reason why it's such a futile thing to do here. There's no possible way House Republicans would agree to anything that comes out of whatever deal that might be agreed upon in the Senate. So what are these Republicans in the Senate actually gaining by doing this?
I think what they're hoping is that they'll be able to work with the Democrats. Because remember, Republicans in the House have a very small majority, 4 seats, 5 seats. And there are certainly 4 or 5 squishy Republicans who could conceivably vote with the Democrats.
Really?
And there is a parliamentary maneuver called a discharge petition, where if you get enough people in the House to say, we want this bill to come up for a vote, the Speaker of the House has to bring it up for a vote, whether he likes it or not. So that's, I think, what they're thinking of, is they want to work with the Democrats to get something passed.
I see.
In spite of almost all Republicans. I still don't think it's going to happen.
Can we name names here? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I only saw Tom Tillis's name, who proposed this, worked with Kirsten Sinema in December on something like this. Who are the other Republican senators who are on board with this?
I don't know who signed on to this,
Okay.
so I don't want to name any names.
That's fine.
And take somebody's name in vain.
Right, right. All right, but we will look into it. In the meantime, it's got to be amusing to you to see New York City Mayor Eric Adams go on this border tour to see the crisis firsthand and then announce publicly to the world that the federal government is failing our nation on the border. Eric Adams, of course, the mayor of America's largest sanctuary city, suddenly he's become tough on border security. It's like Donald Trump down there wanting to build the wall.
Well, actually, not really. I mean, he is a NIMBY mayor, no illegals in my backyard. But he's actually not calling specifically for border enforcement. What he's saying, he just said this recently, is that the right-wing Republicans need to pass comprehensive immigration reform. In other words, they want to pass an amnesty. Yeah. That's somehow the solution. So it's crazy. On the other hand, I think that Mayor Adams and some other mayors and others did call the White House behind the scenes. And that was the reason we saw that recent trip of the president to the border and the supposed border plan, none of which is going to work, but they are responding to pressure from their own supporters.
We're anticipating the numbers for January to be near record numbers again. I think I saw the estimate at around 250,000 illegal crossings of our border. This is not letting up anytime soon. Where do you see this headed, Mark? Is this just going to be another 2-year election cycle until it becomes the issue for the next president to take on?
Maybe. I mean, if I knew the future, I'd be betting on the horses. But the numbers could go down a little bit conceivably in the next month or two because of what the president announced, where they're returning Cubans and some Cubans and Venezuelans and others. But it's not a solution, because if that happens, then they're just going to go right back up again. And remember, there's only 4 countries they applied these new rules to. There's 190 other countries in the world, and they're all coming too. So I think we're going to see 2 years of more of the same. I don't know how else it's going to work out.
In fact, Mark, listen, I've been fortunate enough to have conversations with you over the years about this. You've forgotten more about immigration law in this country than most people know. I remember you saying, listen, there is a giant loophole right now, and that's the amnesty claims. People who come to our border, if they're caught,
Asylum, right. They
know they can say, I'm afraid, I claim amnesty. Realistically, lay it out for me. The law for amnesty in this country has very few provisions as to what is a legitimate claim for amnesty and asylum, and economic hardship is not one of them, right?
No, it's not. I mean, asylum is something that was basically created right after World War II, and in response to the Cold War and what happened in the war, and it was designed for basically a handful of Russian ballerinas, people who defected in small numbers.
Right.
What it's turned into is basically this open invitation to go anywhere in the United States or Europe and just say you fear return. Now, the problem, of course, is this administration and others will define what constitutes persecution as broadly as possible. So this becomes basically a way of avoiding the rest of the immigration law. And until that's dramatically rethought from the bottom up, we're going to keep having this problem.
But the fact that the current law, as you say, goes back to the Cold War era, where people fleeing authoritarian communist regimes feared for their lives going back, it's remarkable to me that 3 of the 4 countries that Biden's actually sending people home to are Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, 3 authoritarian communist countries. I mean, if anything, maybe they should be allowed to stay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd argue not, because what we're talking about, even in Cuba at this point, things have changed. I mean, Cuba is in bad shape, but it's basically just another dysfunctional third world country ruled by the army. And we've returned people to Cuba routinely for years now, in the thousands. They haven't all been put in gulags or anything like that. I mean, this is not a good place. People leave because the country they're coming from is not a good place to be. That doesn't mean you just get to come to the United States.
Well, and if the laws are going to be reformed under immigration reform, so-called, to be that anybody who lives in a country that is worse off than America has a right to come here, it's going to get pretty crowded pretty fast. Mark Krikorian, we'll have to leave it there. Great stuff as always, Center for Immigration Studies. There's plenty to talk with Mark about every day. More to come. You're watching Salem News Channel. Connor Tonight.